Welcome to Stories in AI. What a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Ganesh, thanks for having me over, and pleasure to be talking with you.
This is awesome. I know we've been trying to do this for a long time, so thanks again for taking the time. Why don't we kick us off with your personal story, your journey, and you've done so much in your life, and you're in the thick of action right now at Merck. So give us your history.
Yeah. So, well, I actually started my sort of career or journey in life, professional life, by starting a Ph.D. in physics. So my background is actually in theoretical physics with a concentration around material science and what today would be called condensed matter physics. And so during that work, there's a lot of focus on simulations, along with the theory of how materials work, and that kind of led me more into the computational physics area, if you will, and that progressed to pretty much a 20-year career in scientific software. Then about 9 years ago, I joined Merck, MRL, the Merck Research Labs, part of Merck, and just really, sort of continuing the work around scientific modeling, scientific data. And the work that I've done at Merck has really focused on modeling simulation broadly across the research area. So, some of the tools and applications that we've developed enable everything from machine learning and traditional modeling in the sort of chemistry space all the way up to health economics and outcomes. So we build solutions that help our researchers to essentially screen and find compounds all the way to when the compounds or the drugs rather, products are in the market. What's the best placement? How do we manage diseases, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's been a good trip at Merck, I would say, and more recently, I've been involved in some of the work around quantum computing and next generation ML, et cetera, deep learning, and kind of bringing those capabilities to some of the work that we do at Merck.
No, that's awesome. It's such a fascinating journey, and and you are in the thick of action right now as a pharmaceutical company. In this last 2 years, ravaged by this virus, coronavirus, in the middle of the pandemic. So this top of mind question for everybody here, the Omicron variant, right? Give us your opinion. You understand both the technology side and the biomedical side. So what is it? I mean, is this evolution in front of our eyes that's happening faster than we thought?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. So as you know, viruses do mutate quite often, and in fact, when they jump body to body, there are mutations. And some of those mutations are, just natural mutations in the virus transmitting. But then, these variants that we are seeing, so Delta and now Omicron, really are the variants that are strong, right? So, it's basically evolution. It's survival of the fittest. The body also has natural defenses against viruses, and that's why a lot of people they don't get really ill from the viruses because their bodies naturally, natural immunity and defenses that we have. And so obviously, the stronger viruses, the stronger mutations will be the ones that naturally survive. Now, the thing about Omicron is that it has 30 mutations on the spike protein. The spike protein is basically the bit of the virus that latches onto human cells. And so that's, very, very unusual. And so, in some of the discussions we've been having, it's like, how did this emerge? Is it a response from the virus to the fact that more people are vaccinated, or, just there's such a mishmash of, sort of cures that people have applied, and maybe, this virus is mutating to kind of counter those defenses that we're putting in place. And then the other interesting factor is that Omicron and Delta are now the two strong mutations, right? And so it'll be interesting to see which one actually survives. And we also have to, the mutations are more transmissible, but the other question is, how much of an effect will it actually have on the health, right? So people that get infected, will they develop more severe symptoms or, so there's a lot of data that needs to be gathered here beyond just these initial data points that we have.
No, I agree. And I think it's funny you say that, right? One is like Omicron versus Delta. So hopefully there won't be enough collateral damage as they fight it out in the human body, right? On the other hand is like you mentioned the discussions around like, is it a response to the vaccines? But, given the fact that you and I were talking, given the fact it's arising in South Africa where the vaccination rates are still really low. And I don't know whether the data from the breakthrough cases are conclusive enough to support that yet, but I think that's a thing in process, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think with the breakthrough cases, that's a little different because, obviously no vaccine is 100%. And so, the vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting ill, right? The vaccine just prevents you from getting severely ill and hospitalized, right? So, a lot of the breakthrough cases, the symptoms have actually been pretty mild, right? It's been everything from just the feeling of having a cold to, a mild flu-like symptom, right? So that's an indication that the vaccines are actually working and doing what they're supposed to do, right? And so obviously, where vaccination rates are high, the death rate has obviously dropped. The infection rate may continue going up, right? And so we have to look at all the data, and it's not just the infection rate. We have to look at death rate, hospitalization, etc.
Yeah, the only reason I was thinking breakthrough cases were the fact that, like, can you actually watch if the viruses are evolving in those cases, right? So which give you an indication.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the flu, right? The flu is a SARS virus, right? And so this will, it's going to stay with us. This is not
going to live with it.
Nobody is really thinking that this is going to go away, right? Now the question is, can we develop a vaccine that's as effective, or will we end up with essentially a cocktail like we have in our flu vaccines? That every year or every other year we'll have to get a booster and account for this. And then the variants will continue. But I mean the one positive with the vaccines, and particularly the mRNA vaccines, is that to change a vaccine is actually much more easier than it is with the traditional vaccines. And this was actually one of the reasons why, Moderna and other Pfizer, et cetera, were able to come up with a vaccine so quickly, right? There was already research that was going on in this space. And then when, COVID hit, they were actually able to develop a vaccine very, very quickly. So, there's obviously a lot of skepticism around the vaccines, and the reality is that they came out very, very quickly because we had the technology, and really all we did was to sort of accelerate the approval process. Typically vaccines and approval process is one thing after another, and what we did was actually paralyze the way that we did the approvals, right? And so we were able to fast track, the approval of the vaccine. But as variants emerge, I think the companies will respond and be able to come up with booster vaccines much more quickly.
No, it's fascinating. I think you're touching on a few things that are, I think, very relevant, like outside of this scenario thing. One is the impact of technology compounds over time, right? So, mRNA didn't just happen in a year. It was 30 years of research that culminated in being ready when the situation arises, right?
Exactly.
And the other thing is, like, what this pandemic also showed us, and this rapid evolution of viruses, this quick, this amount of mutations, is the speed at which we need to be ready to go from data to outcomes, right? It's just completely accelerated over the last, this 2 years. And of course, the other big thing that came out of COVID was all machine learning models were wrong, right? Because with the dependence on deep, long-form data versus shallow, more contextual data, I think the pendulum is swinging a little bit backwards. I mean, it's going to be a combination of both issues. So, no, this is fascinating. Kam, I want to explore more the data products and AI, the use of AI, applied AI in life sciences in this discussion today, right? Can you, and I always look at, and people, a lot of people don't really know this, but life sciences is probably one of the really early adopters in statistics, machine learning, deep learning, and so forth. Can you give us a color of the state of the industry? I mean, what's the adoption like? What are the popular use cases there? And give us some color on life sciences.
Yeah. So I think the first thing that's important is that we have to distinguish between AI and machine learning. Obviously, AI is based on machine learning, but it's an encompassing term. And so what goes into AI is a combination of the traditional machine learning methods, along with new approaches like natural language processing, computer vision, et cetera, et cetera. And so this sort of term around AI, I think, is a little misused, certainly in our industry. So in my mind, if we take an example from our industry, so a true AI would be where we build a machine where a researcher could set a set of conditions on a problem. And that machine is able to then, respond with a plan, a set of models, the data to be collected, etc. In other words, the machine is designing a clinical trial for you, right? So it's a clinical trial, it's a patient population, the data to be collected from that population, and then the models to analyze that data, right? And that's a difficult problem. And today, the way we solve that problem is it's a combination of the machines and humans, right? There's so many variables and conditions that go into something like this, and humans are very adept and easily recognize can plan around or design around those conditions, etc. Right? And that's really difficult for a machine, right? So I think we will get to a point where we can truly have a machine which is designed, for example, to guide or construct clinical trials, and we don't need to retrain that machine every single time, right? So we're essentially parameterizing the conditions for a trial, and the machine is then able to design a trial for us. So in my mind, that would really be a true AI. Now, with machine learning, we have models. We train those models, we retrain those models. And so, this is something that in our space has actually been used for several decades now. Everything from property prediction for physiochemical properties to or toxicity, these sort of effects of a drug on the body, right? So ADME effects, etc. All the way to image processing. So, a lot of our images that we get from pathology, etc. We routinely use machine learning to do that. And so over the last 5 years, that's where we've seen the sort of biggest impact for deep learning or machine learning, where we've brought in new methods, new approaches to really enhance these methods and techniques we've used in the past, and to basically create models that are either easier to parameterize or they're just more accurate. So, for example, we have property prediction models now that just take in very, very simple information about a compound. There's a format or representation that we use in the industry called SMILES, and it's essentially a 1D descriptor that describes a compound. Now, in the past, you would have to take that SMILES string, you'd have to create a structure from it, you'd have to create a whole bunch of pre-compute a bunch of properties around that structure, and then you would then do your predictive modeling. And so now we're actually able to just train a model based simply on that SMILES string and values that we have from our training data. And these deep learning networks, obviously we still don't understand how deep learning networks really work, but they're able to predict properties with very, very simple inputs. And so that makes it very easy for us, right? I mean, we can screen, millions, billions of compounds much, much more easily than we used to in the past.
No, that's awesome. And it's actually interesting. One, the fact that I think the distinction between AI and machine learning, and you're so true, right? In fact, I also feel that some of the early approaches in machine learning, and I've been thinking about and talking about this to a lot of people, our early approaches in machine learning was all based on expert systems, symbolic logic and stuff, which was truly capturing intent and context and stuff with the data to train a system, right? Over the last decade, with evolution of deep learning and more data-driven methods on machine learning, I think we've swung the pendulum a little too much to the other side, and we're just expecting machine learning to solve everything, right? And in these, the real world, the real world scenario where you can solve really hard and tough problems is when you can combine both these approaches to build a system that can solve, which is exactly what you're saying, right?
No, absolutely, yeah, and again, it's I mean, you can imagine that maybe 50 years from now, we'll have the machines that we see in sci-fi, right, where these machines are really built in a way that they can replace human beings, or they're assisting the human beings, and that's really where where I kind of see things going, right? We're not truly going to replace a human being. I mean, there have been some, when you look at AI widely, what was it, maybe 3-4 years ago, there was an AI that was created in Japan to process insurance claims, right? And that replaced 30-40 human workers, right? Now, this is a machine that is fit for purpose. It's making the decisions that a human would make, right? So, it's conceivable that we will get to a point where, we can simply ask a machine a set of questions, and that machine will have enough training and the data there to then, basically give us answers, right?
Yeah. Part of, it's even like the society will evolve, and, people will evolve as well. The one other thing that you actually mentioned was the need for like the SMILES example that you took, right? Wherein, the importance and relevance of data vocabulary, normalization and harmonization is so it's a little underwhelming in the level of awareness for that, because especially in pharma, where you have so much rich literature, but then all of that is in different formats. So you need we were working with and we had talked about it, right? We were using some of these burn IDs and CIDs as indicators to refer to drugs and diseases and so forth to do this science analysis. So it's fascinating. Let me use that question to that comment to go into this question on the role of data, right? So before I even go deep into data, what is the state of adoption, right? Of the techniques exist, but how scaled are they in these organizations, in large life sciences companies and pharma companies? Are they, and what are still the bottlenecks that you're working through?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, certainly in the research side and over on the early discovery side, ML and deep learning are now, it's bread and butter, right? I mean, there has and continues to be a push to use more in silico approaches, so that you fail early. You screen out the compounds that really aren't going to go anywhere, and that saves a huge amount of cost up front, right? So the adoption there is very strong, and certainly around the last sort of 5 years with deep learning and the hardware that's also becoming available, GPUs, TPUs, the cloud, obviously. So the bottleneck has really shifted away from the hardware question, right? I mean, 10 years ago, if you did machine learning, you were either doing it in a on-prem data center, huge clusters, or, you were doing it at your desk side with a small GPU cluster, right? And so that affects, how rapidly you can develop models or the accuracy of the models. And so now that's shifted away. That's, it's no longer, it's an issue for other reasons, but its hardware isn't an issue. So really the bottlenecks right now are starting to shift more around the quality of the data, right? And access to data. And, data and access to data is really the key to all of this, right? If we don't have good data, our researchers aren't able to access the data easily enough, then, that will hinder essentially the performance of the research. And so some of the things that we're doing is, along with the modeling aspect, is actually putting into place, data platforms that allow access to that data, or, combinations of various data sets, so that when you create your model-ready data for the training, it's done in a way that's reproducible. It's, all these sort of things that you need for good data science. Access to machine learning capabilities is also much, much easier now with, solutions that are cloud-based. Several of the major players out there, they actually produce very cost-effective solutions. So, if you need a cluster in the cloud for 2-3 weeks to train your deep learning model, it's actually very cost-effective. So some of the bottlenecks have gone away, but, obviously as the science is evolving and getting better, there are, other bottlenecks that we continue to sort of work around.
That's interesting. No, I think, especially life sciences is where you produce so much data, right? And, it becomes really the data side of the problem needs to be solved so that you can actually go to perform the right science. What are some of the best practices here, right? I mean, what are some of the things that you're doing, Merck is doing, and that you see the industry doing around the data platforms itself?
Yeah, so we kind of follow the FAIR principles around data. So the data is findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, etc. Along with that also comes the quality in data, right? And so obviously, good data will produce good models, right? And so in order to create good data, you have to have standards and processes that enforce those standards, right? So are we consistent in how we're ingesting in data? Are we consistent in how we capture the data of our instruments, etc., right? And that is still a problem with things like instrument capture. It's not as problematic because it's basically a process that's running there, but we still have a lot of processes both within the research lab and in in trials or in as we're working with clinicians, where it's still a human being, right? So we still have human beings that are entering in data in the lab. We have obviously doctors that put in data into electronic records or handwritten notes, and so if you're using that data to then build your models, the quality of that data is very, very important.
Yeah. No, and totally get it. And then we partnered together a few times to solve that very problem around it, Ruth. So let me switch gears. And you've been also a very early proponent, believer, and even practitioner of quantum computing, right? And where do you see that evolve? Is that really going to? I mean, where are we on that? How do you see that? How do you see the promise of QC in life sciences or to the world in general?
Yeah, so quantum computing for us obviously is a natural fit, right? I mean, we use quantum chemistry techniques, quite extensively in early discovery. Everything from simulations to property prediction, or using data from quantum chemistry to then inform or create, additional models, right? Different models. So QC, as I said, it's a great fit there. But we're also looking at QC for problems like optimization, right? And so this isn't just within the lab or in the manufacturing process, but as we need to distribute our products, so how do we optimize around that? And again, it's not just, it's the traveling salesman problem. How do we get product from point A to point B? It's actually within even the transport of those products, right? So we could lose yield in the transportation. And so, these sort of optimization problems are also, part of our QC journey. So we're still very early. There have been some good wins there, and more in the optimization space than in the simulation space. And, Google a couple of years ago, sort of declared quantum supremacy around the simulation that they did on a 12-atom molecule. Now that isn't even close to the smallest sort of drug-like compounds that we deal with, and these were hydrogen atoms, right? So for our space, the simulation around compounds is still we're a ways away from that. But what we're learning is how do we use QC to solve these problems, right? And and so, it's kind of like, when you're doing your PhD, right? Your first year is spent like figuring all this out and what models, what methods am I going to use? And then, you start applying those learnings to actually do your research. And so that's where we are at the moment. Now for AI, this is again, a really interesting sort of space, or I should say an overlap between QC and approaches in AI. And again, it comes down to the fact that with a quantum computer, you can address a problem in a very different way, which allows you to essentially present the algorithms with much, much more data, right? And more complexity in the data. Sort of similar to what we were talking about, just taking the smile string and being able to compute a property around it. It's sort of, we're at that point where, the data deluge problem will actually be solved using approaches in QC. And that's where, again, AI will, in my mind, be accelerated by these techniques. I was involved with a company where, we built a very simple model, and I got to actually press a button to run the model on a piece of quantum hardware. Made a big song and dance about it, but the reality was that the true success in this was that model that was created could actually be retrained on a very, very different set of data, right? Without a data scientist spending months and months rebuilding the code, right? And so it's the same QC algorithm. You can essentially tune it for a different problem, and that goes back to this comment that I made earlier on, that a true AI will you won't have to retrain it. You'll present it with problems, and the AI will be able to basically figure out what the problem is based on the questions, etc. Right, and that it really comes again with how much data the machine can really process. How much data can you present to that machine, and the algorithms that obviously then process that data and come up with an answer.
That's fascinating. I think QC, quantum computing, could solve the AI repeatability problem, right? Basically, the fact that you can solve multiple problems, the cold start that doesn't happen, right? And you can actually really, instead of going through the entire pipeline building process, training and going through it. That's fascinating. And I've been watching the space too, but I know it's too early. But it's pretty exciting with the possibilities, what it can actually bring.
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, it's kind of like where we were, back in the days of the transistor and all the rest of it. The technology to create the transistor was there. It was just everything else around that transistor, right? So the biggest challenge right now is can we eliminate noise and other factors that will affect the algorithms running on these machines? And we're getting better at that. Creating qubits nowadays is not really a massive challenge. The scale of the qubits continues to sort of grow, but along with that is essentially everything that goes into using those qubits.
Yep.
So I mean, over the last sort of 5 years, again, I would say there's been tremendous, increases in both performance and the algorithms and all the rest of it. And there's QC gets a lot of the limelight when it comes to things like crypto and military applications and this sort of thing. But along with this there's a lot of work that's going on in the algorithms, right? And how we can use those algorithms across many, many different problems.
At some point we'll need a whole hour deep dive on quantum computing. We'll get you back on the show and talk through that. On AI, one last question related to the industry and where you were at. What are some of the current focus areas or initiatives that, and what are some of still the challenges that you're trying to solve today? Right?
Yeah, so there are a lot of pre-competitive initiatives. Vistoria and a whole bunch have whole groups that are focused on this problem. There are also a lot of companies that have popped up, emerged over the last 3-4 years. And that's part of the challenge that we have, right? So there's just so much hype surrounding AI at the moment, and it's in order to really be successful and accelerate here. We need to kind of cut through the hype. We get poached every month by some company saying, "Hey, we've solved the entire drug discovery process end to end," right? And like, not really. You've solved a piece of it, but there's everything else that goes with it, right? And so, you kind of have to, be very selective in the partners that you work with, right? And that's what's really going to, sort of accelerate and also help the adoption. We need big wins here, and we do have big wins. Unfortunately, the big wins aren't always the ones that are the most limelight. I mean, obviously, with COVID, it was a huge win there. Once the sequence was published, researchers went to work, and using ML techniques, we were able to look at either existing compounds. Could we tackle the disease with the compounds we had? We didn't need to go into trials and all that. This was all done through analysis and a lot of machine learning. And then obviously the sequence and, using that sequence to determine the vaccines, etc. So, that really kind of brought to attention, just how far we've actually come with the approaches and the technology and where we are with, hardware algorithms and the data science.
That is awesome. Kam, this is fascinating. What advice do you have for technology leaders and business leaders in the industry when they're approaching their AI journey today? Either starting off or they're scaling their journeys and stuff. What are some nuggets of wisdom?
Yeah. So, the first thing is obviously, just cut through the hype, find the right partners, and, be very pragmatic about your approach, right? They're very, high and long horizons around this, but be pragmatic and have a short-term journey as to what can be accomplished, right? As I said, this actually is no longer, in my mind, a technology problem, right? 10 years ago it was, but today it really isn't.
So
right?
True. So true.
Hardware is easily accessible, not an issue anymore. So really, the next thing to look at is, how is a company or an industry creating opportunities to bring in people with the right background, right? And certainly for our space, we get people in from a whole variety of backgrounds: engineering, computer science, obviously the natural sciences, biology, chemistry, etc. Right?
Sure.
But that's not always the best people to have, right? So you can bring in a data scientist, but if they don't understand the domain, then they may not deliver the best data science, right? And so I think we kind of have to look at this one as an industry, also as in academia, right? So how do we guide curricula that those data scientists or those people that are in the natural sciences, but they're also getting some training and expertise, building up some expertise around the use of ML or these approaches, right? And so, you've got to build up your competency in your workforce as well. Some of that, again, could be done through retraining. We get a lot of people now that have the data science label because that's, the new buzzword, but
it's sexy.
Do they create data science?
Yeah.
Arguable. So as I said, my advice is find the right partners, just ignore the hype, and then just bring on the right people to get the job done.
Awesome, Kam. No, that's very good advice. And, I had one guest, Akshaya Bhargava, he said, there's a lot of snake oil being sold in AI. So avoid that. I mean, it's very common, right? And folks like you who have been in the journey for some time, you understand it. But, there's a lot of others who, go into partnerships not really knowing what they're getting into. It's awesome. I got a couple of rapid fire questions before we wrap up. Artificial general intelligence. Do you believe in it? Do you worry about it? Is that going to happen in our lifetime?
So I mean, this, it's a huge topic here, right? It's everything from can it actually happen, right, all the way to the ethics of it happening, right? And so I mentioned, this AI that replaced 40-odd workers
in Japan.
And then whether it's AI being used for something like that, or it's AI being used for autonomous vehicles, etc. I mean, this is going to have a huge impact, on society. And again, 2-3 years ago, the European Union actually had a study and a collection of minds around this problem. And some of the principles that they proposed were, we have to have something like a living wage because machines are going to be replacing more jobs.
UBI, yeah.
We have to, also build in some principles around, how these machines function. And one of the things that was interesting to me was that the recommendation was that there's going to be a requirement of a kill switch. Right. So whether it's a software AI, it's a machine, you have to have a kill switch in there that you can turn that machine off. So, there's a lot of thinking around this, obviously. And, maybe we'll get there one day. We will truly have an AI that is really indistinguishable from a human behind a curtain. Right. I believe we will. As I said, I think that the technology is just in this space is evolving so rapidly, and then everything that's going on in QC space will bring in the processing power, the ability to present the problems that we have in a very, very different way, right? And if you think about it as a human being, we're thinking about a problem in so many different ways, right? And a machine can really only think about it in
very lenient,
a handful of ways. Yeah,
that's awesome. Now, Kam, this is awesome. One last question, personal question: what is one power practice that you use?
Well, I wake up every morning thinking, what am I doing today? And, what's really exciting me? I mean, and that's, for me, this job, every day is exciting, right? Whether it's just these sort of conversations or, it's like, okay, we've got to get a product out. We've, got to get this done because research is depending on something. And so, I just, keep my enthusiasm up by, looking at what's going on in my industry, looking at other industries and, just talking with a lot of different people, getting ideas from people and, just keeping that enthusiasm up. And, that seems like, okay, it's easy, but it can be draining,
it's nothing but easy.
Mental overload and, like I said, I'm very, very enthusiastic about this space, and really want to be able to solve problems and solve these difficult problems.
No, I mean when we totally hit it off, isn't it? Thank you for the friendship as well, because I remember like we were talking 2.5, 3 years ago when we first met, and we were talking about it and how you were excitedly telling me about like, hey, the complexity of the problem that we're trying to solve is this, and we can do more. We can do more of this in here. So, no, your enthusiasm comes through for sure, Kam. Kam, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been fascinating, and thanks for all your commentary.
Great, yeah, no, Ganesh, thanks for having me, and yeah, and again, thank you for your friendship. I mean, I think there's still a long journey ahead here, and I'm excited to participate in that journey with you.
Thank you, and you're so right. AI, we're still so early in the innings. The whole world the future is so bright that we're gonna start needing shades, as I say.
Yeah.